Alright, so welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Graham Knives GL Razel, and this one right here is on loan from a local buddy of mine. So you know who you are, and I'm glad to have a friend supporting the channel. But anyway, since this one's a loaner, I haven't exactly carried it, but I have handled more than a few grams in the past. I even own a few myself, so I like to think I'm pretty familiar with the guy's work. So I just have this one right here on loan to show off a few things since I don't have a custom with that signature Razel grind. I think that's an important combo to have for your first gram video. So I decided to borrow it. So anyways, Jon Graham is the name of the man behind this one, and he's a maker I very much respect. The guy really does know how to design and build a knife. He's a custom maker. He's been in the game for a number of years now, and he's not really the most active maker out there, but he has made some designs for Sierra KT, and he's done some small runs of Midtex. I can't exactly remember the name of the company that made them off the top of my head, but I know it was an American company. I know that for sure. I want to say it was Chad Nichols, but I reserve the right to be wrong on that one. Anyways, if you've heard of Jon Graham, though, chances are you know him for pretty much two weird things that only he really does in the knife world. Number one is that Razel grind that you see right there, and number two is that tail clip that you see in the back right there. But first off, we're going to be talking about that Razel grind. So the guy's pretty much famous for that Razel grind right there. It gets that cool sounding name because it's supposed to be a combination of like a razor and like a chisel. So you can use kind of like the top part for scraping. But anyways, he just kind of mashed both those words together, and I will say it really is kind of like a hate it or love it kind of thing. You go out and show someone your new gram, you'll probably get one of two reactions. They'll probably say, "What the hell is that thing?" Or they'll say, "That looks like a pretty useful tool." If I'm going to be completely honest, I was kind of in the former category before. I thought it was kind of ugly when I first saw some videos of it. I think it was Jim Skelton that first brought it to my attention. But anyways, it took me a while to really warm up to it. You're just so used to a knife having like a tip right here that not having it makes it just kind of seem like it's missing. So, the thing is, Jon really does design his knives to be real working tools, and when you think about it, you're not really using the very tip of your folder very often in your EDC. Then again, I can't really speak for you here, but in my case, hardly ever. I use reverse grip every once in a while in my EDC, usually when I need to like puncture something, let air out of like a bike tube or something like that, but it's by far the least common grip I use. It looks nice to have a nice pointy blade, but you don't actually need an acute tip normally. And I know I don't need it in my EDC use. But anyways, back to what I was saying earlier, these are meant to be tools, so the blade is designed, most blades out there are designed with at least some aesthetics in mind, but this one right here clearly has like this function forward kind of aesthetic in mind. It just kind of like has that kind of design philosophy behind it. And everything's just kind of, it looks like it was built from a purely functional standpoint. And from that standpoint, I really do prefer like a Warncliffe or like a sheep's foot or something like that. Something that lets me get more work done with the edge, because it lets me, it presents more of the edge towards that direction, and it lets me get a lot more control and better use of the point right there. So you can kind of think of what he's done here with the Razel grind as kind of like he's taken a sheep's foot right here and just kind of sharpened the forward part right there. Or I guess you could kind of think of it as like the most American Tonto out there. Excuse me on that. Where like instead of say something like this, where you get like a normal Tonto with like a defined edge right there, think of it as him kind of taking this forward edge right there and kind of moving it back this way, so that's kind of like that. So it's kind of like he's prioritizing like the secondary point on the Tonto or something like that. And I will say that secondary point's usually the most useful part of the Tonto for me, so as you can probably imagine, that this Razel right here is just like this wonderful user blade shape. You never really notice just how useful that extra edge is until you actually get one in hand and you really start putting some use behind it. And this one right here really is meant to be used. Jon doesn't do too many fancy finishes, like not too much of like the hand satins, shiny polishing or anything like that. Even when he's using like fancy exotic materials, usually everything's in this nice user finish that you kind of see right here. See a lot of stone washes, acid stone washes, orange peeling, things like that. Things that make it so you're not really afraid to use your knife. You mar it up with use and the finish will kind of help you hide the wear on it. The other thing he's known for is just kind of this weird little invention back here. I'm going to close up the knife. And that's the tail clip that you see in the back. So on basically every other pocket knife out there, you're going to see a clip more akin to like maybe something like this. Or even if it's like a deep carry clip, it just kind of loops around and kind of hits the knife on the side right here. So what this tail clip is doing is it's looping over this way, and it's hitting the edge of the frame instead of the side. So it looks kind of weird, but until you really have it in pocket, you don't necessarily notice the genius behind this clip. The biggest complaint I normally hear about deep carry clips is just how hard they are to get out of pocket. Like, let's just say this is the fabric of your pocket or something like that. Okay, this clip's a bit too tight for that. Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay, so like something like this. So then this is about how much you see sticking out of your pocket. So you don't really have too much to grab onto. So you end up grabbing onto a clip, and that ends up putting more pressure onto the fabric of your pocket. So some people complain about that making it harder for you to really like get it out of pocket. Never really had too much a problem with it, but I will say it is harder than like a normal pocket clip. So how this one works right here is it kind of loops in this way. So in your pocket, it wants to be like this, but your pocket's just kind of pushing it this way. So when you put your hand in there, you give it a little bit more space, so it wants to kind of go back to being like this. That means you have a lot more space to go in there, pinch it, and grab it out. So yeah, that's kind of like the idea behind it. Since it's like kind of hanging that way, you kind of get the discreteness and the function of a deep carry clip without all the inconveniences that I just mentioned. You also don't, I also don't keep anything else in my knife pocket, but I have noticed that when I reach into my pocket, like I said, the knife naturally wants to go like that if you give it a bit of space. So when my hand goes in there, it goes like this instead of like this. So it ends up taking a bit less space in my pocket if I reach my hand in there. And it kind of pockets easily too. With the way it's all shaped, you kind of see the blade kind of going down right here and the frame kind of going up like this. So the fabric of your pocket's just kind of led straight into this ramp on the clip right there. So it goes into your pocket relatively easily. And when it's in your pocket, you can kind of almost forget about it. It's kind of a thinner knife. This one has thinner stock than usual, but it's a 3.5-inch knife, but it can disappear in your pocket. Part of it's all that contouring and rounding that he does throughout, but a big part of it really does have to do with that tail clip right there. So it's not a perfect clip. Every time you go out and do something weird, there's always going to be some trade-offs, but I will say it's worth trying it out for yourself to see if it works for you, but there are a couple small things that bug me. Like most deep carry clips, like even this one right here, they tend to move around a bit more than normal clips just because it kind of loops around, so there's a lot less really keeping it in place. So this one right here, it's a lot thinner than usual since it's resting on the side, so you get a lot more lateral movement on that. So it's never really been a functional issue for me, but it just kind of cheapens the overall feel of the knife. It makes it feel less solid, and I'm not really a fan of having something feel like it's moving in my hand. So, and the other thing is, it seems very possible to push the clip into the space where the blade travels. That's more of just like a theoretical complaint. Again, it's never really been a problem, but just something that's always in the back of my mind. But, you know, I might just be paranoid. So, he's doing something a little bit different here, so I'm tempted to just give it a pass, but I just thought I'd mention it just in case. The other thing that might be an issue with the tail clip is that with a normal clip, it can just kind of fall into the gap in your palm and just kind of help fill your grip, at least if it's placed well. The tail clip makes it a little bit uneven back here. And that unevenness in the frame can be a little bit uncomfortable. Your pinky's just kind of resting up against it back here, and with the way you naturally want to hold it, like let's say if you want to hold it in like a hammer grip or something where you choke back a little bit, you really do feel it back there. But with the way you naturally want to hold it in like a saber grip like this with your thumb over, your fingers in the back just kind of tend to lift up at the end. So it doesn't really become that big of a problem. But just keep that in mind if you want to really bear down in the back right there. You'll feel it. Now a lot of other reviews out there, they just kind of focus on those two things. The Razel grind in the front and the tail clip in the back. I mean, they're important parts of the knife for sure, and it's kind of like Jon Graham's signature, but what normally makes the knives great is overlooked, at least in my opinion. it's kind of just overshadowed by those design elements. After most reviews I watched, I was left thinking, well, that's a weird knife right there, but I didn't really think too much of it. When I finally did pull the trigger on a custom Graham and I got one in hand, I noticed right away, this isn't just kind of some weird novelty knife. This is a perfectly built tool. And that's the stuff that doesn't really translate into video. And it's just kind of like what separates his customs from his mid-techs. Don't get me wrong, right? His mid-techs are great, but let's just say like if his mid-techs are up here, his customs are all the way in the atmosphere. Like it almost doesn't really compare. He hand makes all of it, and he's one of those makers where you can really tell. His customs just have soul to them, and it kind of has that handmade feeling to it. I probably sound a bit insane right now to most people, but some of you will know what I mean, and those are the ones I'm talking to. Even on a technical side, this is the part that's kind of a bit easier to explain. I've never really had a Graham custom with any kind of issue. Centering's always been dead on. The thing's always been solidly built. You usually have a small back spacer in the back right here, and let's just say you hold this up to a light source or something. You can't pass any light through it, so there are no gaps between the frame and the back spacer, so fit and finish is usually pretty good. I've never had any hint of blade play, there's no lock slip, there's no lock rock. Sometimes a bit of lock stick like this one right here, but it usually goes away as it breaks in. This one hasn't really been used, so I'm willing to give it a pass. I've gotten some new knives from Graham before, but yeah, and those have always taken a while to break in, so I just assume this one hasn't had a chance to. But just so you know, so in this review sometimes you'll see me kind of two-hand the lock, that's just the reason behind it. I always say that lock stick isn't really a defect unless it gets in the way of you unlocking the knife, and I can still disengage this one just fine, so either way, not a problem with me. But before I get sidetracked on that, what I'm trying to say is his knives are always on point. They're always perfectly built. I touched on ergonomics before, but I'm really going to hit on it now. I can't really find a single hot spot on this handle when I'm using it normally, or when I'm holding it normally. The clip is almost a hot spot, but I kind of explained that one away. It's rounded everywhere, it's perfectly shaped for your hand, and the lock bar right here is level with the frame. And so he only cut out like this part right here for access, and that's basically all you really need. A lot of other makers do it wrong, they overdo it, and ends up being an ergonomic mess. But for this one right here, it's perfectly done. And when you look at it this way, it kind of reminds me of an XM18 3.5. I'll bring one out right now so you kind of know what I mean. See. So you kind of have like this choil up here, and then you kind of have like this double finger choil thing going on in the handle that just kind of fades away in the back. The top's a lot different, but it just kind of has that same feel on the bottom right there. And we all know how good the XM18s are, so that's a nice comparison to have. There's also a few runs of jimping up here. So it's right where your thumb wants to land, and I think this one's pretty well done right here. Like, you can move around on it just fine, but when you really put some pressure on it, it kind of locks you in. It grabs you back when you need it, but it's not really aggressive. Put your thumb further up, and you can... I don't know if I can show it actually. Yeah, so you see how the top part here is round? So your thumb just kind of lands on this nicely crowned part of the spine right here. You can choke up using this choil back here, so you can get up right next to the edge of the blade, so there's no dead space on this knife. It isn't all that comfortable to get right up next to the edge just because of how thin that blade gets right there. So you can do it, but you might as well be holding the edge if you do that. So it's not really all that comfortable. The other thing is this forward choil right here, it's a little bit awkward to use. You basically need your thumb up here in order to use the choil down here. Because if you move back like this, it just feels like it's kind of forcing your fingers apart more than it really needs to be. So, yeah, and the other thing is, it's back here. The choil just kind of disappears back here. Because you can hardly even see it with how thin the blade is. So it might not be great for ergonomics if you have like your finger up here, but what that thinness means is that this thing is scary sharp. So Jon Graham's already a maker who's pretty good at sharpening his knives. I've never had a knife that came dull from him. But on top of that, this one has thinner stock than usual and has a really pronounced hollow grind to it. So it's paper thin behind the edge, and you can actually even slice with this thicker Razel edge up here. Like this up here will even cut receipt paper. So what that hollow means right here is that it's so pronounced that you need to sharpen it until it's about up to here before you really get any substantial like thickening on the blade. So it'll pretty much last you the rest of your life and, well, basically the life of the tool too. And the other thing is, I don't know if I can show it too well since the mark on this one is white. Oh, showing up okay. So this one is CPM 154 with a Paul Boss heat treat. So CPM 154 isn't really all that special, it's just kind of like the default that knife makers use, but I always kind of think of a Paul Boss heat treat as kind of like an unofficial steel upgrade. That's usually what it means in terms of performance, at least. But anyways, put all that together and it basically means that if you want a slicer, you can't really do much better than this one. The other thing that people don't really tend to hit on is the action on Grahams. That might look impressive right now, but the part that will really blow you away is that this thing isn't running on bearings. This thing's running on phosphor bronze washers that I'm not going to be able to show, but it's running on a really tight pivot right now. Like there's no side-to-side play even when the knife is unlocked, not even a hint of it. And the other thing is this thing has a flipper that's set well behind the pivot right here. That usually means you have a bit of problems with consistency, but this thing flips better than some ball bearing flippers out there. Sure, you can get to misfire if you really try, like this. But if you actually like go out to flip it or something like that, it flips out every time. It's amazingly well dialed in. So it just kind of feels like everything's working against it, but it still flips really nicely. Flip it hard enough and you can even get like a little bit of like that double click sound to it. See if I can show it. A little bit. It takes a slight bit of technique though. This isn't really one of those flippers where you can just touch it and it flies out. It doesn't really rely on a super strong detent, and how it flips kind of depends on what you put into it. So light pressure will bring it out about maybe like halfway like this, but like any real attempt like medium pressure, it'll get locked up just fine. The flipper just kind of guides you too. Since it's kind of like this, it kind of slopes up over here, flattens out a little bit and then goes back down. So your finger just goes right here, the jimping holds you exactly where you want to be, and then it just flips straight out. Having the flipper so far behind the pivot means that it'll snap open every time you push button it too, and that was kind of what I was showing before. You just kind of push straight down, opens every time. And the other thing that kind of blew me away when I found out is that this knife was actually built around 2008 to 2010. So this right here is like a 6 to 10-year-old knife that flips amazingly well on washers. And most people came and pull this off right now with bearings, and this guy was building stuff like this 10 years ago. This thing's absolutely insane. I don't even know if like the flipper craze had really picked up back then. I didn't even know if ball bearing pivots were really used back then. And to pull something off like this 10 years ago, I think that's just pretty much astounding. And going off of more recent Grahams that I've handled, he's only gotten better since. He's mostly moved on to bearings since then, but his actions are a little bit more consistent, but it's still very well done. Okay, so my camera cut me off, but just to kind of sum things up, like what I said before, every Graham that I've held was basically perfect. This knife that I've been going on and on about for 20 minutes, basically perfect. People normally focus on like the obvious stuff like the Razel grind or a tail clip when looking at a Graham like this, but the knife doesn't just end there, and I think just focusing on that doesn't really do the knife justice. So that was just kind of a point that I wanted to make. You look a little bit deeper, you'll find a masterfully built tool, not just some kind of weird novelty piece. And this is the kind of tool that feels like it was built without compromises. It's just kind of function first sort of approach that I just notice and appreciate, and every single time I see it, it gives me a little bit more respect for the maker. These aren't cheap either. They go for slightly over $1,000 on secondary, even for like a basic no frills build like this one where half a side is G10, but I do have to say they're well worth the cash. The time and effort that puts into it, you can clearly see it. So if you like this kind of a knife, if you like this kind of design philosophy, and you see the value behind a custom knife like this, then I think you owe it to yourself to pick up a Graham at some point. You just won't get the full experience watching an idiot go on for 20 minutes on YouTube, and you won't get the full experience from his mid-techs. Get one in hand, and I think you'll see for yourself. But anyways, that's all I got on this one, so I think I'll close it out with some close-ups. Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.